Just as a heads up, I will be heavily dosing, heavily dosing on coffee as we have this wonderful conversation. Because today we are talking about Saturn, but we're not talking about Saturn from an astrological perspective. That's been done before. Way too much, if you ask me. Because I find it very interesting, sort of intriguing, how many people will talk about the planets from an astrological standpoint, because that's how they perceive them, right? They're these celestial astral bodies that exist sort of like outside of our grasp, yet they affect the human mind and the human psyche in a variety of ways, whole archetypal forms and energies and stories, and the mythos of human religions has been based on these celestial bodies. You could argue that particularly um, the planets of Saturn and the Sun have been larger players in enacting this mythos, right? The titans and giants of worship, and including the moon as well, right? The unlikely underdog. But what we're going to explore now is the aspect of what these planets, Saturn in particular, represents. And when we use the word aspect, it's very important that we understand exactly what we mean by the word aspect. Now, whatever I tell you today, look at it from a point of fiction. You're being told a story. So let's pretend, okay, in the past, we've talked about two things that we've dubbed. You're not going to Google search these things, and they're not going to pop up in your search feed. We made these things up. Let's pretend. Okay? So this is one man's imagination against the infinitesimal abundance of potentials and potentialities and realities that could exist out there. So, yeah, bear with me. We've talked in the past about vampiric physiognomies. What is vampiric physiognomy? Well, the explanation is very simple in simple terms. It means that repetition equals closeness to perfection. So if I have a genome or a genetic code and my body in the material world, it functions in a sense of trying to execute this genetic code to the best of its abilities, right? To the best of its abilities, then as above, so below, if you argued the point that if it had 100 attempts, right, it would do a better job at it because that's just how things exist in our material world and the material plane, right? The more you do something, naturally, the better you're at it. So let's say, for the sake of hypothesis, mm, that a genetic code or a human code is run through a computer a single time. It'll probably come out with a few errors, right? But then if it's run 10 times or 10,000 times, most likely it'll do a better job. You'll be able to troubleshoot a few of the things that you didn't get right, so to speak, right? So vampiric physiognomy, when you look at a human being, basically depicts their status as an old soul. Now, keep in mind, we say old soul and not advanced soul. Like the meaning of someone who is old does not necessarily mean they are wise. The idea that they are old is, let's say, again, for the sake of fiction, that they've gone through several incarnative cycles, and because they have trained their their body, their genome, their aspect to recreate and reestablish their human form, their material form in a more perfect way, right? They come out a little bit more symmetrical than most, right? They come out a little bit more with more dominant features, right? They come out almost looking like, they're sculpted into being. While the rest of us, sort of come out with, our little shortcomings here and there. Sometimes you'll have a crooked nose or a fucked up lip. So, yeah, that is what we consider vampiric physiognomy, right? So, how is vampiric physiognomy conveyed? It's conveyed in the manner where, for example, we know about the warrior and hunter archetypes in males, meaning the warrior archetype during developmental years, postnatal, of course, the testosterone that exists within the child's body, it will either go towards the jawline and strengthen the jawline and the frontal bones of the face, or it will go, like we said, to the cranium and extend the cranium to enhance the senses. Now, if there is a little bit left, right, like let's say extra, that will go sometimes to the nose. It'll give you a strong nose, or it will hybridize the cranium and the jaw, and both of them will be relatively protruding. This is what we call a hybridized form. This is a good trait, meaning that, there's a good balance in this. But what if all three of these traits, all this triad on the physiognomy is expressed, right? This is what I would call and you would call an impish, devilish look, right? Like how are demons and imps depicted? They are depicted with strong, jutting out jaws, an extended cranium, and voila, also a strong nose. So all of these three predatory sort of like features, they're present. Now, if you look at today's celebrities, so on and so forth, you will see that even the ones who are born without a vampiric physiognomy tend to, how to say, want to mimic it, right? They do all kinds of changes on their faces and so on and so forth to get the look. And that is, for them, the look, no judging. Now, outside of this, we also spoke in the past. Maybe you were here, maybe you were not, but we'll re-explain it. We spoke about this place called these places, I should say, called the Temples of Black Opulence. Now, what are these temples? Where are they? Do they even exist? And what are they trying to teach us? Well, what they are trying to teach us is a very important thing. They're trying to show us that there is forgotten lore littered across the universe and in the cosmos somewhere. So let's pretend we somehow gained entry to forbidden knowledge. Again, work of fiction. Okay? Humor me. It's a story I'm telling you. I'm H.P. Lovecraft, and you're the emboldened listener, right? You're doing me a favor by assuming what we say has, you know, relevancy. So pretend for a moment that you've gained access to forbidden knowledge, and let's say somewhere in this deep and dark lore of the cosmos, there are theories or simple truths. And one of these theories, my dear friends, is that Saturn, right, swings its tail. What does that mean? Saturn swings its tail. It used to be a song, right? And now we also know that the depiction of devilish or demonic beings, what do they have? They have animalistic traits. They have a strong tail, right? You look at the dryads, you look at Pan, look at the goat men or the goat men hybrid. So it's a hybridization between animal and man, human, animal. Ooh, right? Now, a Saturnian influence as it is now is an influence that is achieved through repetition, frozen time, right? So anything that repeats is of Saturnian influence, right? The song you play over and over, the melody that's stuck in your head, that is Saturnian influence. Saturn, right? Things that turn constantly. So it's a constant revisiting of the same exact thing. And now, when we say Saturn swings its tail, what we mean, if you look at Saturn as of now, it has rings. So it can also be considered its tail or many tails. And the funny thing with Saturn is that, let's say, if we're going back to the dark and decrepit hallways of those same black temples of opulence, let's say you go down a hallway and you grab a dusty tome, and in that dusty tome it says, maybe, just maybe, you can assume that Saturn, before it got its name, or Kronos, or whatever you want to call it, um, was not always the source of such influence. There is an outlying theory that stands that says that back in the day, Saturn was the original sun. And because Saturn was the original sun, its influence over the Earth and its denizens and other planets was great, but it was also frozen in time. Because what is the primary aspect or the attribute of Saturnian energy? Well, it is repetition and time. So let's say, for the sake of, again, fiction, the influence of Saturn is the cause of unending evolutionary repetition. And what comes out of unending evolution? Life. Life is brought forth for a millennia, right? Millions and billions of years of repetition from the very first life form, from the formation of the cell. Quantify that 100 million times, and out of that cell you get a life form. And the more repetitions a life form has gone through, of course, and we talked about vampiric physiognomy and physiology, the more repetitions a life form or a species go through, the more it can perfect its material nature, right? Not only survival of the fittest, but survival of the oldest. But with the changing of the times as environment changes, and we'll speak on that soon, why it changes, there are some things that become obsolete and outdated. Now, humor me again, and let's say within this dusty old tome that you've found, you fall upon this idea or sentiment or theory that Saturn, as the original sun, was then promptly renamed or named as the fallen one, because Saturn is very material in its at its core, right? A sort of a frozen sun. Because it's very material at its core, as serving as the creator of life itself through repetitive motion, perhaps by its own desires and designs or some other occult force or hand, before it functioned as a portal through which light could bleed out into the world. Ah, you see where we're going with this. You see where we're going with this, right? As our current sun right now does. But if it did function as a portal in the past, what happens to, and I know I already posted this, but I'm just going to say it because of the dramatic effect. What happens to the portal that has one way in and no way out? Now, Saturn is the sixth planet from the Earth. It has a hexagon on its northernmost pole. Six is a very important number. And if you look at six, you'll see that it depicts Saturn swinging its tail. And if you understand what the two oldest, most ancient symbols in human existence are, you will know that it is the vortex, the inward vortex. So something popping out of nothing. And then the outward vortex, the consuming black hole, be it the swastika or whatever you wish to call it, a reversion of the vortex or the vortex itself. Now, when you understand the meaning of the vortex, you understand the meaning of a portal. The portal is a torus, a toric field. On one end, it has an inward vortex, and on the other end, it has an outward vortex. 6 and 9, interchangeable, right? Now, if you look in the eye of the storm, so to speak, when it comes to Saturn, you will understand a very simple truth, which can be observed again by the naked eye just by seeing the shape and form of the planet, that on planet Saturn, you find an ever raging vortex. Could this be a portal? Now, when light bleeds out into our world, let's say through the sun, and yes, the sun, let's say from this dusty old tome that we're reading, it is assumed that the sun is also a portal. And Saturn is a half working portal. Material things can go in and be dissolved, but nothing can come out of it except for the slightest whisper. And we know that suns fall all the time, right? So if we're following the theory that Saturn was the original sun, let's borrow some knowledge and wisdom from Greek mythology. By the way, a lot of people don't know that Greek mythology, right, and Caucasian mythology are some of the oldest. So you can look at the Hebrew days. Some of the Greek mythos is older than that. A lot of people don't know this. So if we borrow some information from that, from Chronos, which signifies Saturn, Chronos gives birth to many children. And long story short, there is some sort of prophecy for dramatic effect. Chronos is told that one of his creations shall overthrow him, and the mythology tells us that ever since Chronos devours its own children in fear that one of them will, you know, pass him by in power and influence, let's say. But, long story short, eventually a child is stolen away in secret. A child is born and stolen away by its mother, and that child is, guess who? Odin, Zeus, who, by the way, is closely regarded as having a similar effect as the sun. And this child, as it grows, Guess what it does? It rebels against the father, as Kronos once rebelled against its father, and it goes and takes Kronos and his titans, and he defeats them. And the prophecy is done. The prophecy is claimed, so to speak. The child overthrows the father, and the father is, guess what, locked away in a prison of his own making. I really wonder, and again, you're humoring me right now for the sake of fiction. I wonder where that prison could be located. If it had to be somewhere, where could it be? And the new son is born, right? So, if you wish to understand the story of Saturn and the worship of such, you have to go back and understand the story, the archetypal meaning of the story for what it is. You need to stop looking at these things like planets. You can look at planets for the sake of fiction again as bodies of dead gods, interdimensional beings whose dense, stone cold hearts are found in the form of planets like pearls in our three-dimensional world. But that doesn't mean that they do not have interdimensional bodies and effects. They are archetypal energies. So if Saturn is the fallen one, and then a new sun is born, what does that tell you about the worship of this and that deity, right? It becomes very simple. So Saturn is the original heart of light, and we know and understand that Saturn has the energy to give birth to new portals. But Saturn, as it is now in its fallen state, is bound. And what is it bound by? By primality. It's bound by its rings. And the Lord of the Rings, an absolutely genius piece of literature, the one great dissonant evil creates magical rings, and he gives one ring to each king of each faction, right? And then it creates a master ring, and through this master ring gains control through temptation and corruption over the others. And this story is replayed constantly throughout time and humanity. All you need is the right tools and the context to know it. Every religious scripture, every archetypal myth or story or legend somehow relates to this story. And because it is so, you have the introduction of Saturn today, right, as the malevolent force, right? If there was anything you could antagonize in the world, there is this malevolent force, of course. And then there is the idea of the Promethean flame, like we said, the idea of Lucifer, who is another aspect of Saturnian archetype. But this is a karmic archetype, meaning that it is an existing desire which hopes and dreams of liberating humanity from the same imprisonment that its predecessor caused it. And through this desperation, Prometheus or Amiron or whatever you want to call it, there are many variations of this character. It steals the fire of conscience and consciousness and intellect and imparts it onto man. But of course, this also causes all kinds of chaos, right? So, in truth, in an astrology sense, or any sort of, in a biblical sense, even in an archetypal sense, it's not like we're talking about these old ancient things that don't exist. No, it's right there. You can get on a rocket ship, travel for, a very long time, but it's going to be there. The same ancient old force, right? It's going to be there. So we already agree that thanks to this fictional outlook, we can assume that planets are interdimensional archetypal beings that affect all things around them within their gravitational fields in, different types of influential ways. And if we can agree that that is so, we can also agree that um, there's one planet who's gone awry. It used to be a portal or a source of light, but no longer is. That planet is Saturn. But if you can release yourself from the influence and the chains and the bondage of this power, right, you will discover that it is, in fact, is not a malevolent force. You will discover that it is a teacher of sorts. And Saturnian nature is just that. It is the secret heart of light. Saturnian nature implies outward darkness and coldness and an inner heart of light. If you can understand that, then you can understand the Saturnian aspect. If you can understand the light in the heart of darkness, then you can understand it. If you can't see the function of it, the rationale behind such display, right? Then it'll be difficult to know because I'll tell you a secret. One of the many secrets that we find in this fictional place that we're in right now is that when a being or a mind has fallen to great extent, it goes to a place where light can't reach, light representing truth. So it goes to a place where truth can no longer reach, can no longer be attained. And the only thing that can reach it as proof of light are the shadows it casts. Now, the eclipsed sun is symbolic of this dynamic. The eclipsed sun or the false light depicts this dynamic where the truth will cleanse you. If you fly too close to the sun, you will dissolve into what you always were. And what you always were is ether. You are the part of the all consuming energy. But because we are afraid of truth, let's say, the ego mind is born. And the depiction of the ego mind, let's say, is the Saturnian state. In our case, in an extended manner, the unconscious ego, signified by the moon, and as it eclipses the sun, it it outwardly reflects its light or false light. It doesn't cast the light, it just, holds it behind. So the basic idea is this. A lot of people don't like talking about ego and their own delusions because their ego keeps them safe. But the primary lesson of Saturn is that beyond that darkness, right? Beyond the darkness of the ego and the lies and the delusions and the deceit and so on and so forth, lies the great work. Meaning what? The light lies behind the darkness. So when you look at the yin and yang, right? That symbol, don't look at the light in the dark portion as a small dot. Don't don't interpret it as, oh, just a little bit of light and a lot of darkness. No, 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 no. Look at it from a 3D point of view. You won't see a little bit of light anymore. You will see a distant light. That's very different. It's very different. On the other side, you won't see a little bit of darkness, but you will see a distant darkness, right? If you go into 3D, if you take the 2D out of it and you go into 3D, it all makes sense, right? The light is in the distance. So if you do want to derive light from these sources, let's say Saturnian sources, you have to go through a lot of darkness. And if you have Saturnian energetic charge, you know that this is incredibly apparent, right? It's incredibly apparent. You have to earn the light. But the funny thing is, in a material sense, in a Saturnian sense, you're already endowed with a lot of material knowledge and like wisdom and secrets and yada yada. That's why it's like such a sexy type of energy. Sort of like has this mystique about it, but it's nothing impressive either. It's very cold and distant, and it's almost like stoic and contained within itself, and it's very stubborn in that. Ask anyone, even the journeyman. But that is only because the unfolding of its true potential lies behind much suffering and torment and pain. That's the imprint. But if you can take that thread of light outside of it, right? If you can grasp that thread of light and take it out, that's an incredible energy. Inversion works both ways. You can go really, really deep. Like, for example, again, I forget where I read this, but I love this story of two crooks who are friends, lifelong friends, um, and they decide to rob a city. It's like a children's cartoon. There was something like that, or a book. I don't remember. It's from some no-name writer, whatever. They try to rob a city, and their plan is they're gonna run for mayor. One of them is gonna run for mayor. The other guy is gonna set him up, and when he wins this position of power and influence, their plan is to, rob the citizens blind, right? So they make a whole big deal out of it. They run a campaign, they do charity, they're the perfect they're, they're the perfect force of good, right? Look at us, vote for us. Look, we care about the kids, we care about the women, we care about the men, we care about the dock workers, we care about this and that. And the people fall for it. And the people fall for it, and they go and they praise them, and um, you know they thank them all the time. They're so grateful, right? They give them gifts, cakes. And these guys are sitting in their pretty office now, very close to achieving their goal, and they're like, man, these people are so dumb. These people are such morons. Can you believe it? They're just eating straight out of our palms, right? Eating all of our BS. We'll be rich in no time. But as time goes on and sort of they get to that stage, um, they're being hugged by children and giving gifts and cakes and all kinds of like whatever for being good, decent human beings. They're doing charity work. And when they finally get to the top and they're elected mayor, right? What happens is that one of them gets a soft heart, right? They're like, and the other guy's like, "Hey man, what's wrong with you? I thought we were robbing this place. What's been up with you lately?" Right? And this guy doesn't understand what's going on with him, right? Because suddenly now he has a conscience. People love him. He's respected. He did all this charitable work. Oh, long story short, you know where this is going, right? They their conscience hits them and they invert and they actually end up, being mayor and leading the city, but not actually, bullshitting people and stealing shit up. They actually do a good job. They're great. They love it. They came into power with the wrongest of intentions, but they ended up turning. So the forces of good can be very convincing in that manner, right? So it's very similar to this type of inversion magic where you can go really high and then take your mask off and present yourself like, ha ha, I was the jester, I was the trickster, I was the demon all along. You all fell for it, you stupid idiots, right? Or you could have genuine bad intentions, right? And those bad intentions can take you to a point of influence and power when you're at a lower consciousness state, when you just don't know what kind of pain you might be causing and so on and so forth. But if you can invert that, right? If you can turn from that to good, right? Suddenly the other force completely takes over. Because even the most sour origins, like the most sour origin stories can have a worthy redemption type of ending, right? And then the most hopeful of stories and the most sweet of origins, the humblest of origins, can have a terrifying ending. That's the lesson behind it, right? If you really look at it. So that's the secret of the energy, right? It's an inversion, but it's a portal. It's a dual-sided portal. It's the vortex, either inverted or not inverted. It's the source of all materialistic, theatrical, performative magic that is done in ritual and repetition, right? It's where the things arise from and where things go to break down, that type of thing, in the material plane. But it is also the primary transformer. So you have 100 people, and one out of that 100 could embody both the spiritual gifts and power and influence and temptation that it provides, and it also can embody a secret heart of light. So the tables, when they do turn, and they will turn very quickly because whether you believe in this stuff or not, whether you believe in the power of temptation and evil, faith and love as primordial forces of creation, they are far more convincing. They are the most convincing element or aspect that can possibly exist. There is no force greater. And all human hearts are vulnerable to it. Each heart. So if you ask someone who can't really see, they'll tell you, well, all magic stems from the same source. Of course, you would say that because you have no understanding of what light is, what white magic or white sorcery is. You cannot even grasp it because you are unable to interface with it, so you think it doesn't exist. The ego mind thinks nothing outside of its knowing exists. The collective human ego, the false light, the black sun, so on and so forth, feels that it knows that nothing outside of its knowledge can exist. And what it does, it needs to impart and enforce a logical meaning to everything. And by doing so, it forgets who and what it is. And as we are part of that system, as we embody the, that, that ego as a form of individuation from totality and absolution, the absolute, we understand that our minds, our ego minds, are frail. So if you don't live in a world that's orderly, if you don't live in a world that makes sense to you, you will become very afraid. So, what the human mind and human brain does is that it takes infinite possibility and then it collapses. And this is quantum physics, by the way. It takes infinite possibility and then it collapses it into its most likely state. You know what that means? Most likely state? It means the state in which it is most logical for a thing to be in. Schrodinger's cat. Will it be alive? Will it be dead? Whatever is the most logical to the mind, meaning whatever is the most safe. Logic is where the ego finds its shelter. So if something is logical, or chronological or hierarchical, if it makes sense in a numerical way, if it makes sense, it will appeal to that truth. But what exists outside of the ego mind? Anything that cannot be explained with logic, right? So if something happens to you, something irrational or supernatural or something that the chances, the mathematical chances of it occurring is, and I know things like that have happened to you, right? But if let's say if the chances are 0.0000001%, and it's not like a single thing that happened, but it's like a combination of things. Like it's almost like these things lined up to happen in this manner to be so obvious that they defy logic and mathematics to the point where the possibility of it having occurred, like the percentage of that is so low that it creates a doubt within your logical mind, like the scientists in you, right? And the reason that happens, or when it happens, that is the miraculous or the illogical, the things that exist beyond the ego, right? That are seeping into your world, right? So again, we're going to repeat it. The things that are not logical, they're paralogical. Those things seep into your world. And that's perhaps maybe if you're observant enough, if you're reflective enough, your first proof or the thing closest to proof that there is more going on beyond the ego. And like we said before in our previous spaces, what the ego does is it offers you up a theory. It offers you, well, this can be explained by this logic and that logic. And if it can be explained by this logic, it's probably the truth. Stop looking, stop seeking, stop searching for things that are beyond logic. So, what is the formulaic art? Let's say with both with physiognomy and astrology and whatever, all of these things. The formulaic art is the seeking of lesser, why we call them the lesser arts. It's because it's the seeking of a lesser hierarchy or a lesser logic that the world appeals to, right? It's the ones and zeros of the matrix ridden mind, right? But from time to time, something will happen. It's not going to be a one and it's not going to be a zero. It's not going to be a binary thing. What is duality? It's a binary system, either one or zero. That's it. Either good or bad. That's it. Something happens, and maybe that something is a two, and you're like, what is this two doing in my binary system? I can't explain this thing, right? Why can't I explain this thing? That's because that's why we're all secretly here. Why you all who are listening and you are secretly here because you undoubtedly experienced something along these lines. And look what you're doing. You're still looking at it from a lens of logic. How does this make sense? Is it because of Mercury retrograde? Is it because. No, 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 no. You have to understand that there are several layers to material living and sacred phenomena. And understanding these several layers is important. And one of these layers is that if you have a flawed or fallen mind, the puzzle is so simple. If you look upon a thing, you crumble it from its superposition state. Again, this is quantum physics, not Uncle Jack. This is quantum physics. It crumbles down from its superposition state of infinite possibility and it is put into its most logical state. That is nowhere to live and no way to live. When you no longer participate, the thing can behave in ways that are beyond logic. This is what we mean when we say make space for the mystical to occur. Remove yourself and your insecurities and your ego from the equation. Remove the need and desire for everything to make sense to you from your limited fallen perspective, and everything will happen for you. And I don't mean this in a stupid materialist sense either. Oh, you'll get that motorbike you've always wanted, Billy. No, 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 no. The miraculous will bleed into your life. That's what we mean. The achievement of that is that the miraculous will regularly make itself known to you if you can allow it to exist. If you don't consume it with your Saturnian ego, if you don't if you have no need to devour it with logic and science. So the worship of formulaic sciences and logic and so on and so forth is the worship of fear, the fear of the unknown, whatever lies beyond it. And the worship of that is the worship of science and a technocratic end. Those are the chains that bind the fallen one. Understand? And those are the same chains that bind you. When you reduce everything around you, whatever I touch either turns to gold or turns to coal, right? When you know that you have an aura that reduces and grounds everything around you into absolute logic, this is a Saturnian trait that we all share collectively as a species. You must then understand that the equation, the hidden variable in every observable experiment known to science, is you. Why do black holes behave this way? Why does that? Because you are there to see it. Because you are there to enforce logic through conscious observation, through deliberate knowing. But if you can just close your eyes and take your mind away, right? Maybe, just maybe, again, for the sake of fiction, just maybe things will happen in a way that you don't expect. Maybe things will unfold a little bit differently than you thought they would. Well, let's say I want to be receiving money from the universe. I'm selfish like that. And I pray to the universe, please give me money, please give me. And then after my prayer, I sit down with myself and I start thinking of like, well, if the universe did want to give me money, how would it give it to me? Well, probably from this. And there's no way that it would give me money like from this source. Like, no, no, no. Like that's ridiculous. You you limit it in logic. So are you really open to receiving money? Or are you only open to receiving money in the ways you imagined you would be receiving money? That's the limitation. And even if you take money as a sentiment, as an aspect of a thing, right? Even then, why are you asking for money? Why do you need the money? You need the money to feel abundant. And then why do you need the abundance? You need the abundance to feel good about yourself, to feel in control. You need the abundance to feel happiness and joy. So why not ask for joy and happiness and safety instead? The more possibilities you keep open, the more tools the universe has to reach you, the more tools the miraculous has to reach you, because it always is trying to reach you. It's been trying to reach all of these idiots who think they figured out the world. And, again, what did we say the collective ego does? What does it do when we say we live in an input output system? What does the collective ego do? When you give it a belief system, it can define, because again, it's a binary system. If you give it a belief system that it can define in the form of expectation, let's say, as a green light and a red light, one or zero, it's going to give you that back. So the idiot who thinks they've figured out the secrets of the universe by studying some old ancient manuscript with the secrets of the world written in them, and this means that, and that means this, and blah blah blah. Guess what's gonna happen? The world, the universe, the what you would then manifest as the matrix system of the web, it's going to output it back to you. So you say, well, today is Mercury retrograde. Today, I'm not going to feel so good. Yes, there is an archetypal truth to that. There is an effect that exists, but it is your choice to subscribe to that effect. And the moment you give away that choice, you open yourself to being affected and influenced and controlled by that choice. So if you say, well, it's Mercury retrograde today, I'm not going to have a great time, right? You are definitely not going to have a great time, because that belief system, that binary puzzle will be solved for you. It will be outputted back onto you by the universe. and you're going to think, aha, I said it was Mercury retrograde. I knew I was going to have a shit time, and I had a crazy crap of a time. So astrology is my new Bible. This is the ego trap that even some of the brightest and most intellectual minds cannot cross over. They're stuck almost forever. Some people forever. You can explain it to them 110 billion times and they will never understand it. Why? Because they don't want to understand it, oftentimes. Because they feel good where they are. They feel in control. But in truth, like in the Matrix, when Cypher eats that fucking steak, that's all they're doing. They're just eating that steak over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's what they're doing. They're just having that fake steak in a fake restaurant, right? And they just like how it tastes. So the greatest secret of how the world functions and how the ego mind functions is that it uses the variable of your desires, expectations, your ambitions, so on and so forth, to shape your worldly fate. And it gives you this option or that option as long as those options do not break the boundaries of logic. When Neo flies into the Matrix, right? Why is he so sought after? Because he's breaking the rules. What he's doing is illogical. So he cannot be tracked within the Matrix. The effect he imposes and achieves onto the world, the logical world, is something that should not exist. Is something that it should not be possible. Why? Because it cannot be defined in a binary system. It's not a yes and a no. It's a what the fuck was that? And Neo bleeds into this world. There's a lot to take away from that on your own journey. Because you will be ensnared in this trap so many times. You will be ensnared in this trap several times over. Do you know why? Because the the theater changes. The grandiosity, the scale, the trickery, the deceit, it all changes. It all advances and progresses into a larger sum. So the moment you think you haven't fallen for it, you have probably most likely fallen for it. Because it will convince you that, well, this is it. This is the bottom of the barrel. This is the absolute peak or the absolute bottom end, the absolute default of how things are. But the secret arm of conspiracy is always there. When Neo wakes up from his little pod in the Matrix, is he still in the Matrix? He could be. He could be. And you know, he might have convinced himself that he escaped and he's not, but he could be. And that's how the wise man thinks of himself. He doesn't overestimate himself, and he doesn't underestimate the larger universe. He keeps his mind open. And you know what else is not a non binary system? The present moment. It cannot be tracked, it cannot be predicted. If even you don't know what you're going to do, then how can the computer know? It can't. If even I don't know what I am expecting to happen, then the computer is blind. But I know that it will happen. But the computer can't understand how I know. But I know because I have faith. Because I hold faith in my heart, which is unexplainable phenomena for the computer. The computer cannot fathom the idea of faith, and it cannot fathom the idea of intuitive thought or intuition. And because of this, to the computer, how you and I and everyone else might look as is we're a zero, we're nothing, we don't exist, we're invisible. Because our behavioral patterns are not predictable. We make no sense to the world. And you know what happens when you stop making sense to the world? The world is forced to make sense to you. When you stop making sense to the world, the only way the world can contain you is to submit to your preferences and to your will to a degree. There are laws in place for that too. But yeah, you can't always be in this state. But you have to understand that at the highest level of your spiritual pursuit, at least in this realm, that's what you will encounter constantly. Different trials, different hardships, adversities, different fears, different insecurities, different belief systems that will be fed into you. And it's your job to rise up above all of those. That is the true spiritual pursuit. Everything else is, oh, I'm vibrating so high. Oh, I'm such a nice person. Everyone treats me well. I had so much pleasure today. This cool thing happened to me. Synchronicity, blah, 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 blah. Your soul does not care, or it cares very little. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have fun. It doesn't mean we should be overly serious about life. It doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the adventure of life. But the moment that becomes your identity, and I want you to look and observe your friends who are sometimes in awe of experiencing or having experienced some sort of, they deeply desire to experience something irrational. And the moment it is given to them, they are in complete shock. They're in awe. Oh my God, you won't believe what happened to me. And they tell all their friends, and that just means that you're not ready. You're not ready for the next level. Because if this can excite you, and if if the collective ego knows that this can excite you, know that you will be tested for that. Just know it. It's going to give you another ego trap. So again, you can live this life as if you expect to be tested and fighting or at war or battling these unseen forces and whatever, whatever. Or you can live your life with good knowledge and as decently as you are able within the context and boundaries of the tests and the hardships and the mission that you are given. And you can live your life in faith. If you can just stop demanding life to make sense, if you can just stop demanding logic or chronology or whatever from everything, like just from like 10% of the things in your life, just 10%, if you can just allow it to exist without your interference, it will start to exist in a higher form. But if you convince yourself that you figured everything out and then you're somehow this master maven, there is only one observable proof and observable effect that can possibly ever imply that you figured it all out. Guess what that is? You'll just disappear. If this world has lost function to you, if you've figured it all out, you'll just poof, you'll disappear. So always remind yourself that. if I'm still here, then I'm still somehow in the game. Then I'm still somehow either a 1 or a 0. That's including myself. Why am I still here? That's a good example of holding the knowledge and living the knowledge. Yeah, those are two very different things. Ooh, right? That's the scary part. You may know all the things, but you can't live them. That's the scary thing. But it stops becoming scary when you can accept it for what it is. You know where you are being taken. It's just up to you whether you want to take the rocky long road or you want to take the smooth path. And the smooth path, ironically and paradoxically, is the path that you don't know. You just have to hope for it. So all of these people, all of these great thinkers and philosophers and great intellectual minds, they can make fun of hope and faith all they want. In the end, and I guarantee this, after 100,000 reincarnations, even if they need to go through it, they will still kneel to hope and faith. Because that is the ultimate destined end for any soul in this world who is looking for spiritual advancement, who wants to get to the next level. They will have to deal because eventually they will realize they will get to this stage eventually. No amount of molecule breaking and timeline shifting and whatever, you know, scumfuckery you want to do, no amount of that will achieve the effect, the true effect of a miracle. And the more you look into the lens, the more you try to study it, the more you try to get it to make sense to you, and a certain degree is good, by the way. God tells you to be curious, study the world, learn from the world, use it as an example, advance technologically. But the moment you imagine yourself as capable as a force that you cannot understand, meaning if the moment you imagine yourself capable of the illogical, right, is the moment your mind breaks. That's, you submit yourself to defeat. It's a beautiful world in that sense. When you really think about it, when you look at it in that manner, it's a beautiful world. It's a beautiful place we live in. Because the ultimate end of every mind is the ultimate humbling. So, okay, we went we went on for long about this, but how does this relate to the idea of Saturnian energy and Saturnian aspects? Well, it's very simple. Saturn is, as of now, not it hasn't always been, as of now, the mechanism through which this effect is achieved. It is the knower of all that has ever been devised or put into words or logic or whatever. But it's blind in one eye. It can't see the things that exist beyond logic, beyond expectation, beyond nature. Those things that seep into your life and those things that occur seemingly in illogical or paralogical ways. You'll walk down a street somewhere, you'll see a sign, you'll have a feeling to go and walk towards it. Can can an ego mind explain that? Of course not, because like, well, it asks itself, well, why? Like, why would some person have a random effect or like a random memory or a random emotional response to, you know, just want out of the blue? Because it sees the world as numbers. And when you see the world as numbers, to you, everything is predetermined. Everything is predeterministic. You wanted the donut because you were hungry. But if you don't have the donut because your intuition is telling you something off about it, it can't register that. You can't be tracked from that system anymore or by that system anymore. Okay, talked long enough about this. Anyway, very fascinating. Can be talked about for several hours on end. But the general takeaway from today should be probably understand that faith is born out of fear as well. And understand that light is sometimes found in the most desperate corners of your life. What Saturn, as a return mechanism or a feedback loop, is trying to teach you and show you is that from certain portions of your life and your psyche, the thread of light, the distant thread of light, must be brought forth. You know, it must be surgically, sort of like removed from the heart of darkness that envelops it, right? And another takeaway should be that your ego is not your enemy, it is more like your guide, but it becomes your enemy if it becomes your identity. If your ego is your identity, then you can never hope to attain any sort of dynamic or relationship with that which exists outside of logic, outside of ego. And that is the heavenly home of angelic beings. That's where they exist, right? Heaven cannot be put within the boundaries of logic. It makes no sense. That's why atheists exist. That's why agnostics exist because they want something that is beyond flaw, that is beyond logic to make sense to them through logic. And logic is a very human creation. It's a very human thing. It's a human fear for us to need to explain everything in a way that makes sense. Because again, if things don't make sense, the mind goes insane. So it's a defense mechanism against the void of nothingness and emptiness and meaninglessness. Meaninglessness terrifies people. There's a trauma response, one big collective trauma response, right? To make everything into matter, to collapse everything into its most logical place because we need it to make sense. Otherwise, our brains go haywire. Otherwise, we go all kinds of insane, right? When I put my hands over the fire, I need it to warm me. I need it for surety, for, for it to be continuous and consistent and reliable. That's what I need. And in that sense, it's good. Think on that. Remember, there's no greater force in this world than faith. Why does our world exist in time? What is time? Time is the mechanism through which things can happen separately from one another. Action and reaction can have an interval in between because of time. And because our world exists in this state, right, where it is through logic, impossible to determine the proof of God or anything beyond it, right? It's that's why I always say the fact that you cannot prove the existence of God is the proof of the existence of God. Let that break your brain for a little bit. Why, you ask? Well, because only a world exactly like ours, a world stretched through time and bound by logic, can facilitate the lesson of faith. Faith is the highest lesson of this world. If you knew about the proof of the existence of God and the higher realms, then the experiment would be useless. It is only through not knowing, not being able to know for sure, where faith as a thing, as a sentiment can even occur, can even happen. So if you can derive faith from this world, if you can leave just 1% of it to hope, the fruits of that faith will always find you. Always. At all times. This isn't self belief. This isn't personal, you know, power and dominance and influence. And those are childish games. Those are kiddie games that the spiritual seeker will eventually grow out of. But the most important thing there is the ability for you to attain just a little bit of faith, just a tiny bit. Because when you have one foot in, that is easy to step into the next one. So you see how complex and sophisticated the experiment of the earthly realm is. There are many traps, many ego traps, things that want you to stay, walking the same circle, right? And it'll make you feel good and make you feel powerful and give you money and material goods so long as you do not complete the game. If life was a game, if it was a incredibly complex and sophisticated puzzle piece, right? So if life was a parable, it would be a parable for faith. And the ending of that, the ending of your inability to achieve faith is that life and the universe in all its great wisdom will put you in a situation where logic can't save you anymore. It will put you in a situation when the time comes that all you will be able to do is pray. If you take it to that point, it's not a threat. It's just how these things work. It'll give you your time, it'll give you your leisure, some people less than others, but it will take you to that very dark place. And it's going to be so dark that the only flicker of light you will be able to experience is hope, faith in the idea that things can go your way, even if it makes no sense that they do. And that is the first step on how God makes itself known to you. For most people, through great suffering and anguish. For the unbeliever, for the unbelieving masses, for the skeptics, right? And the personal power dealers, very much like myself in earlier days, that is how it makes itself known to you because it has to make itself known to you. It corners you in a very dark place. Yeah, figure that out. Figure the amount of wisdom in that. That's crazy, right? But at the end of the day, all you have to do is be yourself. And if you're really, really yourself, if you're like your authentic self, you are going to end up being a very good person, like a very decent person. And if you follow your ambitions and desires, conscience and intuition, if you don't overstep any of these, you will find yourself having a great time in this life. All it really takes is to be a good person um, in attempt, right? If you can truly earnestly strive to be better, it's okay if you make a few mistakes on the way. You know, no one's going to punish you for that. So, yeah, there you go, my guys. We'll talk soon. We'll talk later. There's a bunch of topics to go through. Um, if you want to support me, buy my shit, whatever it is. But you don't have to. I hope you have a great day. See you later.